The Stratus, Air Boeing 787, lifted off from JFK Airport at 10 a.m., bound for Geneva. Gentle morning sunlight filtered through the first-class windows, casting a warm golden hue over the Italian leather seats. The cabin atmosphere seemed tailored exclusively for the powerful, suffused with the subtle aroma of Dom Perignon, the soft clinking of silver trays against crystal glasses, and voices so refined they could have been trained in a business school. Seated in 1A was Andre Bishop, 38 years old, CEO of a $4 billion fintech corporation. He had graced the cover of Forbes, spoken at Davos, and had been invited by the Swiss government to consult on digital financial policy. Yet in that sunlit cabin, all of that vanished into invisibility. Andre wore a perfectly tailored deep blue suit, an immaculately tied Eldridge knot, and a slim, elegant Vacheron Constantin on his wrist. There was no ostentation. He didn't need it. His presence was quiet, but razor-sharp, and it was enough to make others tread lightly if they were perceptive enough to notice. He opened an old brown leather tablet case and scrolled through the strategy deck for acquiring a failing European bank, a deal scheduled to be signed the following morning. Everything about him radiated calm focus and precision like a fruit knife, not large but sharp enough to slice away anything no longer worth holding on to. When the flight attendant appeared with a professional smile, offering the menu and gently prompting, "You may select your meal, sir," Andre simply nodded. He had already pre-ordered lobster bisque and premium filet mignon, as always, with a 2005 Bordeaux. This wasn't merely a meal, it was a ritual, a routine. The small things mattered to a man who had always had to prove he deserved his seat, even when buying the chair. The flight attendant nodded and walked away quicker than usual. Andre lifted his gaze just slightly, and in that fleeting moment he noticed something was wrong. Not in her words, but in her eyes. In the way her hand gripped the serving tray, in her hurried steps, without a single glance back. And then, that familiar feeling returned. It was not the feeling of a businessman about to close a billion-dollar deal. It was the instinct of a black man who had lived long enough in this world to recognize that when you're not welcome, the service feels different. Andre said nothing. He turned his gaze toward the window. The vast blue sky outside seemed oblivious to the racial disparities unfolding inside this cabin. But he knew, and he had learned early in life, that the feeling of being excluded doesn't always shout it. It sometimes arrives in the form of a cold, polite nod, and this time, he wasn't going to let it go. 1 hour after takeoff, the first-class cabin was bathed in soft amber lighting and the faint murmurs of elegant conversation. The passengers around Andre began receiving their meals, and silver trays were unveiled, like the slow act of a 5-star restaurant floating among the clouds. Aromas filled the cabin, beluga caviar, crisp, French bread, glasses of champagne poured with the care of measuring luxury in rarefied bubbles. Andre waited patiently. But then the flight attendant returned this time without a silver tray, lobster bisque, or filet mignon. In her hands was a plain white plastic tray bearing a bland sandwich wrapped in wax paper, an unopened can of water, and a piece of cold pastry. She didn't look him in the eyes. "We're sorry, sir. Your premium meal is no longer available. There might have been an issue with the pre-order system. We apologize for the inconvenience." Her tone was flat, cold, and mechanical, as if trained not to respond emotionally to passengers. But Andre didn't need to read the truth. He read the body language, the faintly performative raised brow, the indifferent shrug. She placed the tray on his folding table, as if laying down a burden. Andre raised his head, locking his gaze onto her face. "I pre-ordered that meal before the flight was even confirmed," he said slowly. "I fly with Stratus at least 10 times a year. There's never been an issue." The flight attendant offered a tired smile. "The system sometimes glitches." "We don't have full control, sir." Then she turned and left, no follow-up, no promise to double-check, and no hint of an alternative. She disappeared as quickly as she had appeared. Andre looked down at the meal before him. The sandwich sat like a silent insult, telling him, even in seat 1A, you're still the afterthought. He didn't eat. He didn't call anyone. Instead, he started to observe. To the left, a silver-haired businessman is offered a second glass of wine. In front, a corpulent older gentleman was being asked if he wanted imported cheese. Behind, a young lawyer invited to sample an off-menu dessert. All of them were addressed as sir with polished professional smiles. And him, just a sandwich and still water. No additional words. No one came back. And he didn't need them to, because by now another plan had begun to unfold in Andre's mind, not on a tablet, not within a merger agreement, but from a principle forged since his childhood on the south side of Chicago. When the world pretends not to see you, don't scream to be noticed. Move in a way that cannot be ignored. Andre took out his phone and opened a secure internal app used only between him and his trusted aide, Jalen. He typed a message, sharp, concise, aimed straight at the heart of the issue. Trigger protocol, internal audit. Flight 917. Verify the cabin crew manifest. Prioritize attendant serving seat 1A. He pressed send. No sound echoed in the cabin. Just a 38-year-old black man sitting upright in seat 1A, staring out at the European sky slowly rising on the horizon, fully aware that nothing would remain the same from this moment forward. The plane glided smoothly across the Atlantic sky. First class had now sunk into a luxurious silence where everything was light measured, seemingly perfect. But in seat 1A, Andre Bishop no longer paid attention to the wine, the caviar, or the gentle rustle of velvet curtains between cabins. He was retracing a very old path. This path began when he entered his first investment meeting at age 25, when everyone assumed he was the IT guy. From that afternoon in Zurich, when he checked into a 5-star hotel, only to be asked by the front desk to prove he was actually on the list. From the trip to Boston last year, when he was stopped at the VIP lounge entrance because he didn't look like a diamond member. Andre didn't need anyone to teach him how to read the micro-expressions. The raised eyebrow, the brief sideways glance, the way people used the word sir with him, tinged with cold suspicion. These details others might overlook, but he remembered every one of them. And this morning, on Flight 917, the system repeated a familiar script again. Meanwhile, on the 47th floor of the company headquarters in Atlanta, Jalen Price, Andre's assistant, sat before 3 computer monitors. The message from Andre had just arrived. He didn't need to ask why. For Jalen, who had been with Andre since the company was still running out of a borrowed back room behind a bakery, a message like that meant more than words. It smelled like war, and Andre never fought small battles. He began pulling data. The whole crew manifest for Flight 917, complaint history for each flight attendant, first-class passenger feedback from the last 12 months. In under 10 minutes, Jalen found the first name, Emma Hallberg, 41, a veteran flight attendant at Stratus Air, assigned to first class. Her record described her as professional, efficient, but behind that surface were strings of filed complaints. Cold behavior toward passengers of color. Neglected to serve special meals with vague justifications. Frequently favored certain passengers based on appearance. Not a single complaint had led to formal disciplinary action. Unsurprisingly, in the luxury service industry, the deadliest form of discrimination is not through words but carefully curated attitudes. Jalen hit a key. An internal report began compiling. He attached images and data and started mapping connections between Emma Hallberg and 5 other crew members she'd worked with, each named in similar complaints. It was a silent network veiled by a polished exterior of professionalism. Back in first class, Andre closed his eyes. He wasn't sleeping, just waiting. He knew the greatest insult wasn't the cold sandwich. It was pretending. A system had been designed always to have a reasonable explanation when excluding him from the picture. No one shouted at him that he didn't belong here. They happened to forget his meal, happened not to apologize, happened to serve everyone else on silver trays while he got paper wrapping. Andre reopened his tablet. The merger presentation was no longer there. It was a new file named Flight 917 Internal Trigger, PDF. At the top, he typed the first line. Discrimination doesn't require weapons, just a misplaced smile. A soft ding chimed as Andre pressed the call button. There was no urgency, no tension, just a precisely timed action, like a CEO calling in an assistant after spotting an error in a quarterly report. Moments later, a different flight attendant appeared, older and more measured in demeanor. His eyes flicked quickly to Andre, then hesitated slightly as though sensing something wasn't right. Andre didn't smile, but he didn't appear angry either. He tilted his head, gesturing for the man to sit like he would in a closed-door meeting with major shareholders. "How can I assist you, sir?" the attendant asked, his voice low and polite, as if Andre had just been upgraded to VIP status, finally recognized as he should have been from the start. Andre nodded, eyes fixed on the man. "I'd like to ask about my meal." The man swallowed, then nodded. Andre continued, his voice steady, like someone reading a contract aloud. "I pre-ordered the premium meal, lobster bisque and filet mignon a week ago. That's what I always do when flying Stratus." "Yes, apologies for the inconvenience," the attendant began. Andre raised a hand, gentle but firm, signaling him to stop. No need for hollow apologies. The previous attendant, Ms. Hallberg, told me the pre-order didn't make it into the system. "Has that ever happened before in this airline's history?" he asked, his gaze direct, cutting like a laser. "There have been occasional technical errors, sir." "Do technical errors typically coincide with everyone else being served caviar and champagne, except me?" Andre tilted his head slightly, his voice low, but each word hit like a nail being driven into wood. The man fell silent. Andre continued, not giving him time to fabricate a clever lie. "Does Stratus have an internal criterion for prioritizing service? If so, I'd like to know what those criteria are." "Sir, I don't have the authority to—" Andre smiled. A genuine smile this time, but cold, so cold it required no follow-up words. "No problem, I understand." He closed his tablet. The conversation was over, but not in the way the other man thought. The flight attendant stood, bowed slightly, then stepped back, as if something in his instincts told him a much larger force had just begun to move. Silver trays clinked in the cabin, and someone else was receiving their second dessert. Another passenger was being offered a heated neck pillow. No one realized that just a few steps away, the system they believed to be courteous and refined had just begun to fracture. Andre looked out the window. The clouds beyond were still pure white, as if untouched by prejudice. But the world he lived in and fought in wasn't nearly as clean. From the inner pocket of his blazer, his phone vibrated softly. A message from Jalen appeared. Verified. Internal connection between Hallberg and the regional supervisor. Cover-up directive issued last year. Evidence compiling. Andre tapped save. It was all clear now. He didn't need to shout. Didn't need to slam fists. Didn't need to demand justice. He just had to do what the system feared most: document, verify, and expose. Because he knew that in the world of people like him, the most effective retaliation isn't revenge, it's consequences the other side never saw coming. First class began to shift in atmosphere. After the lavish lunch, most passengers reclined in their automatic seats, wrapped in thin cashmere blankets, wearing sleep masks, or watching subtitled free French films, perhaps to signal taste. But Andre didn't sleep. He never had during battle, whether across a boardroom table or at 36,000 feet in the sky. His fingers glided across his tablet screen. The data Jalen had just sent appeared like cracked mirrors reflecting a system stained with rot. 6 complaints have been filed against Emma Hallberg in the past 18 months, all of them from passengers of color, all of them marked resolved internally. None resulted in disciplinary action. All had been wiped from the airline's public feedback records. And it wasn't just her. Andre opened another file, a Stratus Air's Northeast Operations Personnel Chart. Cabin Service Manager Jonathan M. Riker had worked with Emma for over a decade and was the one overseeing most cabin-related HR decisions. A red connection line highlighted by Jalen traced a path Emma Jonathan Riker, internal PR department complaint, suppression memo. Andre exhaled softly. It wasn't the first time he'd seen this pattern, but it was the first time he saw it unfold in the sky, where people still believed money could buy respect. But no, not for someone like him. Not if he was a black man. Not if they thought he was the lone exception among a sea of white passengers. Flight attendant Hallberg returned to the cabin, walking the aisle with a tray of desserts in hand, her gaze distant. As she neared seat 1A, she paused for a split second. Perhaps it was because Andre was looking directly at her. No smile, no expression of resentment. Just a gaze, steady, alert, unblinking. She turned away immediately, walking faster, as if her instincts warned her that something was off. But she couldn't have known that every movement she made today would appear in an internal report sent directly to the airline's executive board just a few hours later. Andre opened an internal message window when the cabin clock signaled 40 minutes until landing in Geneva. To Stratus Air Ethics Board, CC Chief Executive Officer. Shareholder Relations Division, subject, Urgent Ethics Audit Request, Flight 917, I am writing not as a passenger, but as a strategic shareholder who has recently acquired 7.2% of Stratus through Slatebridge Partners. I formally request the initiation of an ethics audit concerning the crew of Flight 917 with emphasis on service within the first-class cabin. All image, audio, and behavioral data have been compiled. This is no longer a personal matter. This is a matter of corporate culture. Andre Bishop, CEO, Slatebridge Partners, strategic shareholder, Stratus Air. He pressed send. No alert tone, no fanfare, just a simple action. But its consequences would shake the executive board by morning. In seat 1A, Andre closed his eyes for the first time since takeoff. Not to sleep, but to prepare for what came next. Because this was no longer about a denied meal. This was about a structure that had just been exposed. And the best part, those within that structure still didn't realize it was about to end. The wheels of the Boeing 787 touched down at Geneva International Airport in a landing as smooth as velvet. First class shook slightly, then settled. A few passengers removed their sleep masks, opened their window shades, and checked the time emerging from what felt like a luxurious European dream. Andre Bishop, however, didn't take his eyes off the aircraft door, not to rush out, but to ensure that every piece on the board was precisely where it needed to be. He stood. His suit remained perfectly pressed, not a single wrinkle. Everything about him, from his watch to his stride to the intensity in his gaze, carried an unspoken message. I didn't come here to get angry. I came to clean up the pretense. 2 men in grey suits were waiting at the foot of the airplane stairs. Their lapels bore the Stratus Air logo, but they weren't flight staff but regional operations executives. The kind who never showed up at airports unless something had gone seriously wrong. The man on the left saw Andre from afar and nodded faintly. Andre didn't respond. He walked past calm and wordless, as if the meeting had already occurred and silence was the only goodbye necessary. But they knew. They had received the email. They had read the report. They had seen the footage, and they knew from this point forward they no longer controlled the narrative. Behind them, the crew began tidying up. Emma Hallberg, the so-called professional flight attendant, still smiled and adjusted her hair in the compact mirror inside the crew rest area. She had no idea what was waiting at the rear exit. But the men in white shirts standing there weren't ground staff. They were from corporate ethics and internal affairs. She stepped out, still going through the motions of politely bidding farewell to passengers until she stopped. A man raised a tablet and said her name with formal gravity, Emma Hallberg. "We need to speak with you regarding a report of discriminatory service conduct on Flight 917. Emma froze. A male attendant nearby was also called by name. A third person stepped forward and whispered to the supervisor, "I wasn't involved. I didn't know anything." But it was too late. The list had been drawn up in advance. Andre Bishop had just settled into a deep brown leather armchair in the VIP lounge. In front of him, a freshly brewed espresso, no sugar. His phone buzzed. "Jalen Price. All 3 attendants have been detained. The report is being circulated to the entire Stratus board. The case has escalated from individual complaint to brand reputation crisis. The media team is requesting a statement. Do you want to respond?" Andre took a sip of espresso, then typed back, "No need. Let them answer to the public themselves." He leaned back into the chair. Outside luxury cars waited at the curb, but Andre wasn't in a rush. He didn't need noise because real change doesn't need to shout. A few hours later, on the digital screen at the Stratus Air check-in counter, an internal announcement was pushed to every employee. "We are initiating a comprehensive review of service behaviors that may exhibit selective or biased treatment. All staff will be evaluated based on actual feedback data rather than internal reporting. Stratus is committed to being an airline that places human dignity above all classifications." Andre Bishop looked out the glass window toward the sky. The aircraft he had just exited was now preparing for its next journey. But this time, none of those who had once smiled with quiet contempt were still on board. 3 days after Flight 917, an emergency shareholder meeting was convened inside a conference room on the 52nd floor of Stratus headquarters in New York. There was no media, no press release, just those with voting power and the man who had brought the most expensive airline in America to a standstill over a cold sandwich. Andre Bishop arrived exactly 1 minute late. Not out of carelessness, but because the most powerful person in the room never needs to be the first to enter. He wore a simple black suit, no tie, and a small American flag pin on his lapel. In his hand was the Internal Service Audit, Flight 917 report, nearly 90 pages thick, printed separately for each board member. When he entered, every eye turned. Some in the room had never met him before, but everyone knew his name. Andre Bishop, CEO of Slatebridge Partners, the man who had quietly acquired 7.2% of Stratus Air through a layered 3-round investment. Some had once dismissed him as just another upstart in strategic investing. But no one thought that anymore. The chairman of the board, a silver-haired man with a deep voice, was the first to speak. "We regret the experience you had on the recent flight, Mr. Bishop. We've addressed the individuals involved and are committed to reviewing our internal processes." Andre didn't react. He opened his folder, pulled out a chart. "I'm not here for apologies. I'm here because this system is broken." He walked to the presentation board and placed the chart on the easel. "This is data from the past 18 months. 93% of discrimination complaints came from passengers of color. 0% of those complaints led to disciplinary action. 100% were resolved via internal reconciliation or deleted from the system." A senior operations director interjected weakly, "That was a system error. We haven't fully integrated." Andre raised his hand, signaling him to stop. I'm an investor, not a customer. I'm not here to hear excuses about broken systems. I want to know how much of Stratus's brand value is real and how much of it is just a polite mask hiding selective service. The room went dead silent. Andre continued this time without looking at the report. He looked straight into the eyes of each board member, not like someone seeking allies, but like a prosecutor presenting the evidence. An airline that claims to represent global sophistication, yet trains staff to decide who deserves silver trays and gets paper-wrapped sandwiches. And I, the man sitting before you today, was excluded from that silver tray. Not because of money, not because of status, but because of my skin color. The chairman asked quietly, "Mr. Bishop, then?" "What exactly are you asking for?" Andre leaned forward slightly, his tone calm, almost like a business proposition. "I don't want anyone fired. I want the system changed." He pulled out another document signed in full proposal to amend service policy based on anti-discrimination standards. Retrain all cabin staff under DEI principles. Diversity, equity, inclusion. Implement independent monitoring on flights with diverse passenger bases. Publish biannual reports on complaint statistics and service discrepancies. Establish an ethics council with autonomous authority, reporting directly to the CEO, bypassing PR. If the board agrees today, I'll increase my investment to 10%. If not, I'll transfer my shares to an ESG fund with media ambitions, and then Stratus will make headlines in ways none of you want. No one spoke for 60 seconds. Then the chairman slowly nodded. Vote. All in favor, raise your hands. Hands went up, one by one, eyes avoided Andre's gaze. But he didn't need them to look up. He just needed them to change. 3 weeks after the shareholder meeting, a quiet notice appeared on Stratus Air's official website. No fanfare, no press coverage. We are changing. At Stratus Air, every passenger deserves to be served with absolute respect. We acknowledge there have been invisible standards that caused some to feel they didn't belong here. We apologize and we are correcting it. The announcement came with 4 sweeping reforms. Establishment of the Passenger Diversity Ethics Council with independent authority. Mandatory retraining of all flight crews in anti-bias conduct. Quarterly publication of complaint and service disparity statistics on the airline's website. Direct reporting to strategic shareholders when systemic violations are identified. No one mentioned Andre Bishop's name. They didn't have to. Those who needed to know knew. On social media, when a black passenger posted a video of being warmly served in first class, something she never dared to expect before the post went viral with the hashtag @from1 all of us, from seat 1A to the right, to be respected by everyone. Netizens began digging up old interviews and clips of Andre Bishop. That speech he gave at Davos at age 34, where he once said, "I'm not fighting for a seat at their table, I'm building a new one." And Andre, he declined every interview, signed no additional shares, held no press conference, not even a reply to Stratus's media team when they asked him to help promote the new message. He sent back a single line, "I don't spread messages, I set standards. Your job is to spread them." That night, Andre sat in a small cafe on a Brooklyn street corner, the same spot that used to be a bakery, the first office of his company when he was 26. Jalen walked in, placed a laptop on the table. "You want to see the new numbers, shareholder approval up 17%, stock price up 6% since the reform proposal. The press is calling you the man who redrew the ethical map of the skies." Andre smiled just slightly. "I just named something people got used to not naming." Jalen stayed silent, then asked softly, "Do you regret anything?" Andre took a sip of coffee, eyes drifting toward the distant street, where a young black boy rode by on a bicycle wearing a paper pilot hat on his head. "No," he said, "I just regret that I had to sit in 1A to do what should have been true in every seat. Because true justice doesn't start with someone screaming. It starts with someone who refuses to stay silent. A single denied meal may not change the world, but if the one denied knows their rights and knows how to hold the system accountable, then from seat 1A, an entire corporation can be forced to change how it serves.